Chapter 21, Civil Rights. Okay, we're mostly going to be talking about different groups in America, as I have already talked about some of the major parts of civil rights before. Okay, African Americans. African Americans are one of the largest groups in America at 12%. Many African Americans are still dealing with all the problems that came after slavery, segregation. They're still dealing with modern racism. A lot of African Americans still live in the Deep South, which are areas that are still impoverished in the first place. There's a lot of problems. You'll also find that it all kind of goes in this old, I don't have the picture with me, but there's an old thing of where slaves used to be, and the modern distribution of African Americans is pretty consistent of where slaves used to be in the Civil War. And they actually have quite a bit of African Americans that live in the Chicago and the Detroit areas, and you'll get them all the way up to New York City as well. African Americans, shockingly to me, I didn't know it was this drastic of a difference. Their wealth, which is everything they own, altogether, your cars, your money, your savings, everything. The average African American family owns $12,000 worth of stuff, which is not dramatically high considering many of you, if you have a really nice car at home, may have more wealth in that one car than the average African American family. The white family, on average, has $70,000 in wealth, which could include the home, minus like your mortgage, if it hasn't been paid off entirely, loans and stuff, but that's it's a gigantic difference, 7 times as wealthy white Americans over black Americans. They also suffer high rates of illnesses, unemployment, and single-parent homes. You actually find African American children are 52% of them come from a single-parent home, which is far higher than some white families. By some estimates, it could take up to over 100 years for African Americans to see equality in America. And if you think of it more as like a attitudes thing, it could take 100, 200, who knows how long, for African Americans to feel they've reached equality in this country. Okay, Native Americans, most of your Native Americans are going to be in the western United States. You actually find a lot of these states where most of the Native Americans came from, but they all got kicked out and pushed over to the west. So almost all Native tribes in the Midwest are forced from new lands. So you'll find a lot of Native Americans now in Nebraska's are they're by Sioux City, and Winnebago is on the reservation, and it actually has multiple tribes. So we have some tribes that came. So I believe the Sioux are from like the middle upper west. They're not exactly from Nebraska, but you had like Sioux that were in Illinois and Iowa. So some of them were kicked off and sent west to poor land that is not good for anything, honestly. Native tribes often have problems with substance abuses, which is really sad. You'll find a lot of alcoholism on some reservations. There was a group of Native Americans that sued, I think it was White Clay, Nebraska, because they had an alcohol business right at the reservation border, and the alcohol business was far too large of a store to be for the local community. So I think that actually became like a national case. There's dramatically more poverty, and they often don't get enough help from the government to get out of their situation. And many of the times it's just a band-aid. It's a band-aid on a problem. It's here's some cash. Not like, oh, we're building you a home, we're going to fix everything. It's like, here's the money, here's this, here's that. But it's not going to actually fix the problem. So I said, like, Winnebago's on the reservation. It was interesting. I drove to Sioux City this last December. So I went through the reservation for the first time, and it's just entirely interesting to see a town. There's a lot of like Native American artwork in the town and stuff like that, but there's still generic buildings, everything like that. I mean, most Native Americans live a pretty normal lifestyle compared to everyone else. They might have some more traditions that they do, but they have internet and everything that you have. Pine Ridge, which is in southwest South Dakota, is actually the poorest community in America. There's great things where people help those who are needed. I know we have people go to Mexico every year to help out. If you really want to help out the poorest of the poor, you don't have to go very far. If you just go, you can take a little trip to Mount Rushmore in South Dakota, and then you can help people out at Pine Ridge because they really need your help. Okay, Hispanic population. Hispanic Americans are about 15% of America right now, but by 2050, they should be 25%. You will find as Mexicans are part of the Hispanic racial group, you have Cubans over here. They're going to be mostly southwest United States. You can get to these border areas and they actually make a majority of those areas. You're finding that Texas, which is a Republican state, every single year where you get more immigrants in Texas, mostly Hispanic, that Texas in your lifetime will become a Democratic state, after being such a super hardcore Republican state. You actually find Hispanics are actually far more spread out than African American groups. The most recent immigrants, we're not getting a lot of European immigrants or African immigrants, but we're getting a lot of Latin American immigrants. They're also more widespread than any community than Asian Americans, Hispanic, or Black Americans, and they're almost everywhere in this country. You will find the East doesn't have as many. You get farther north, there's not as many, but you also find plenty of counties where they make up a significant amount of the population. Okay, Asian Americans. They take up to 4 to 5% of America. They're growing rapidly in some areas, but they also have lower population growth natively, so they're not growing nearly as fast as the Hispanic group or even sometimes Black communities. You'll find Asians are mostly on the West Coast or on the East Coast, and they will live often in major cities. They are not very widespread out. You get some pockets of the country, there's almost no Asian Americans there at all. But you'll find large cities where many Asians will take root. You will find that the average Asian person actually has a higher education and wealth level compared to the white population. That's why we have this thing called positive discrimination, where Americans still have stereotypes about Asian people, but they're more likely to have stereotypes in which in some ways are more positive. So, although it may be fairly racist to say that all Asian people are good at school, it's not as bad of a stereotype as, oh, that kid is stupid and I won't help them. Sometimes you will get schools where a teacher may actually help the Asian student because they're Asian before they would help the Hispanic or Black student. Okay, women. 51% of society, but they're often underrepresented in government and business. Women have only reached about 24% of congressional representatives. Never had a president that's a woman. Women make about 80% of what a man makes. It's estimated this gap will not disappear in 100 years. There will not be equality in wages for many of you for your lifetime. Okay, lastly, affirmative action. Although it varies differently from area to area, many organizations are trying to increase their diversity so they're not just all white. So you'll find colleges are the most aggressive in this, and they often may take race into consideration for admissions or scholarships or something. So you will find that some colleges also look to add women to a major if it's male heavy. So you might find like an engineering major is, okay, it would be 50-50 man-woman, but it's 99% man. You might want to make some female engineering scholarships so that women are more likely to join that. Organizations can use race as a tiebreaker, but due to the case Bakke versus California, it can no longer be the main determination. It is legally racist to say, I will only hire minorities, because it does not take into consideration skills, talent level, stuff like that. But if you are truly tied between two people, race could be considered as a acceptable tiebreaker. Okay, citizenship. Most legal immigrants that come to our country the right way take up to 10 years before they become a citizen. It takes a long time to become a citizen in this country, even if you have a relative that's willing to sponsor you. Most immigrants take a government quiz, so sometimes immigrants to this country actually know more about American government than the people who have lived here their entire lives. They also take U.S. culture tests, so there's certain things that I've never seen the culture portion, but they may also give them tips of like, okay, what side of the road do you drive on? It's the right side of the road, stuff like that. Once you are naturalized, which means becoming American, new citizens can have every single civil right as natural-born Americans, except to become president. They cannot become president. Americans can be a dual citizen, or you can be a citizen of another country at the same time. Sometimes people do this where they might be a Canadian that lives in Maine, and they want to be an American too, because they married an American and they live in America. And they want to be able to vote and do everything. But they don't want to stop being Canadian either, so they'll have both citizenships. And then Americans can renounce their citizenship at any time, and they can become no longer American. So you can actually say that I'm no longer an American now. That doesn't mean you're anything else. So usually, if you're going to renounce your citizenship, you better be a citizen of another country. Some people do this so that they can get away from America should they, for whatever reason, not want to deal with America ever again.